Okay, let's unpack this. For decades, it felt like the global expansion of Japanese anime and manga was, this unstoppable collaborative thing.
Right, a straight lineup.
Exactly. You had Japanese studios looking for Hollywood distribution. They were welcoming international money, and often they were kind of tweaking their work.
Adjusting it to appeal to the widest possible audience, the most sort of homogenized global audience.
But something has shifted, and these are very public, very intentional shifts that suggest that whole era might be, coming to an end.
Oh, I think it's more than might. It absolutely has. What we're seeing is basically a strategic, almost a cultural counter-reformation in Japanese content.
A counter-reformation, I like that.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. We're analyzing this huge public declaration from some of the biggest names in the Japanese creative world. The mandate now is unequivocally Japan first.
So what does that actually mean, Japan first?
It means they're explicitly stating, and with the confidence that only huge market success can give, that trying to smooth out the cultural edges of their work for Western tastes is a bad idea.
Specifically for North American tastes.
Specifically, yes. They're saying those demands are leading directly to creative failure and ultimately hurting the property's financial.
Failure? That sounds almost impossible. I mean, you just look at the global numbers over the last 5 years and it's just explosive.
And that tension is the core of this whole thing. You're right. This isn't some fringe artist movement. We're talking about massive IP holders.
Yeah, we're talking about the CEO of Kadokawa, one of the biggest publishers on the planet.
We're talking about Hideaki Anno, the creator of Evangelion.
And Tomohiko Ito, the director of Sword Art Online. I mean, these are industry titans.
And they're all delivering the exact same message. The strategy from here on out is to double down on what makes their content Japanese, on that authenticity, and to stop compromising for outside.
So this isn't just like an artistic preference.
Not at all. This is a high-level corporate business strategy. These are companies whose IPs aren't just popular, they're literally shaping the global entertainment economy. And they have the data to back this up.
Okay, so our mission today is really twofold.
Exactly. First, we need to analyze the just astounding commercial reality, the market forces that give them the power to even make this pivot in the first place.
And so,
second, we need to understand the specific, the creative and cultural dynamics, what we're calling the content conflict, that are driving this really powerful, almost protectionist rejection of outside.
And for you, the learner, listening to this is your shortcut. This deep dive explains a critical moment in global pop culture. It gives you the why certain Japanese shows and manga are just soaring right now. Your Demon Slayers, your Chainsaw Mans, and why Hollywood's attempts to either copy them or influence them just so often fall flat.
It's critical knowledge. It gives you an understanding of global pop culture economic, of market leverage, and the incredible value of cultural specificity, of authenticity in what is a very, very competitive global.
All right, so before we get into why they're pushing back against Western influence, we absolutely have to set the stage with them.
We have, because you need to understand the sheer magnitude of the asset that they're trying to protect here.
It's not a small pond.
Not at all. When they say Japan first, they are saying no to having influence over an industry that isn't just successful, it is experiencing explosive, almost gargantuan.
The global reach of anime and manga it's gone way past just astounding. It's arguably entering the realm of market dominance in some areas.
Astounding is still a good place to start, though, because I think a lot of people still see anime and manga as, a niche interest.
Right, something for the fans.
Exactly. But the reality is it's pulling in massive box office returns internationally. It is dominating streaming platforms and the merchandise sale.
Which speaks to a really high level of audience engagement.
Incredibly high. And it's that staggering success that gives these Japanese creators the leverage, the financial independence to start resisting these outside demands. They can afford to say no now.
Okay, let's ground this in some hard numbers because the projections we looked at are, frankly, mind-boggling.
They really are.
The sources point out that the global manga market, and this is just manga, not the whole anime and merch ecosystem, is currently valued at around $19.35 billion in 2025.
$19.35 billion. That's a huge foundation to build on.
But it's the projections that really tell the story, isn't it? This isn't about where it is today. It's about the acceleration.
That's the compelling part. The market is projected to surge to over $47 billion by 2030.
So more than double in 5 years.
And then it keeps climbing. In the next 3 years after that, it's estimated to hit $63 billion by 2033. This is not some gradual, stable growth you'd see in, say, the auto industry.
$63 billion. That's a phenomenal trajectory. What kind of growth rate is actually driving that kind of surge?
It's a compounded annual growth, or CAGR, of 20%.
20%.
20%. And a 20% CAGR sustained over nearly a decade is just almost unheard of for any mature, let alone one that's centered on publishing and animation.
So when they say Japan first, what they're really saying is we need to protect and own that 20% growth rate for ourselves.
That's the strategy in a nutshell. It's about protecting the engine of that growth.
Let's analyze that for a second. If you're growing at 20% compounded every year, that means your need for infrastructure, for production, for content, that's all growing exponentially too.
Right.
That has to present a massive logistical challenge, doesn't it?
It raises a really profound analytical question. A 20% CAGR means you have to scale up everything massively. You need more studios, more animators, more writers, more sound engineers, more everything.
And traditionally, the only way you fund that kind of rapid expansion is through what? Foreign investment. The very thing they're now pushing back again.
You've hit on the economic paradox right at the heart of it. They need billions to sustain the growth that is making them billions.
So if they reject that foreign capital because of the creative strings attached, how on earth do they fund the expansion they need to meet that $63 billion demand?
That is the tightrope they are walking. Their confidence must be coming from, internal resources, domestic reinvestment.
Or maybe seeking funding from sources that are purely financial, lenders who don't demand a say in the creation.
That would be the ideal, but that's a very challenging distinction to make in entertainment finance. They are essentially betting that the unique quality of the product will allow them to command higher prices and attract pure investment capital, not co-production capital.
That's a huge gamble.
It is. The financial pivot is just as hard as the creative one. They are choosing cultural integrity over the easy money that comes with creative strings.
And we know that a huge part of this growth is digital access. The sources noted that digital formats now make up a staggering 70% of the revenue. That high digital penetration means these uniquely Japanese stories can just instantly reach a global audience. They don't have to rely on those old legacy distribution systems.
The systems that might have had more creative gatekeepers in the past.
Absolutely. That direct link to the consumer through digital platforms, it just removes so many of those historical barriers that led to content getting watered down.
You don't need a U.S. network executive to sign off on the content.
You just need a streaming service to host it. It's a completely different world.
Okay, so let's talk geography. Where is all this demand coming from outside of Asia? The sources point to a really telling example.
They do. France is cited as one of the largest importers of manga globally. But what's really stand out about the French market is just how much manga dominates their entire comic industry.
You mean compared to their own domestic comics, the bande dessinée?
Yes. The sources observed that an incredible 50% of France's total comic sales belong to manga. 50%. That's an enormous figure. Yeah. And it brings up a critical point about the health of, the traditional Western comic industry.
Right.
We hear all the time that the comic book industry is struggling or people don't like comics anymore.
But the data from France and other places, it just suggests the complete opposite. The sources make a crucial distinction. People absolutely still love comics. They love sequential visual storytelling.
They just might not like the monthly Western superhero comics anymore.
Or maybe they don't like the content those comics are delivering right now. The market isn't rejecting the medium, it's rejecting the model and the content of that traditional Western structure.
So manga has basically just taken over that space in huge global markets like France. It shows the appetite for these long, complex visual stories is stronger than ever.
Exactly. The audience is voting with their wallets. They're choosing the Japanese model because, as the sources suggest, the traditional Western superhero model is struggling, often due to creative stagnation.
Or, as we're about to get into, a focus on themes that maybe get in the way of the entertainment value the audience is looking for.
Which loops us right back to the influence of capital. The huge demand requires funding. So studios take money from outside Japan, from Hollywood, from China, from investment firms.
And that's where the danger comes in, at least as the Japanese creators see it.
It is. When you take that money, especially from those with their own, creative or ideological frameworks, you invite influence. He who pays the piper calls the tune and all that.
And that outside funding often comes with mandates aimed at homogenization. Things like make the characters more relatable for a U.S. audience, or you have to censor this theme. It might be problematic in our market.
And that is the core business complaint that leads directly to this Japan first strategy. The creative leaders, they're not being naive about it. They see the financial inputs and they realize the influence that comes with it is potentially poisoning the well.
The very creative well that made them so profitable in the first place.
It's a very sophisticated defense. They're basically saying, look, we observe that the content we created, authentic, specific, often really strange, is responsible for this 20% growth.
Therefore, any attempt to make our content less strange, less specific, more homogeneous, is a direct threat to the market itself.
You hit the nail on the head. The moment you start accommodating those outside interests, you risk eroding the very product that people are willing to pay $1.
So this whole financial pivot, it's not just about protectionism, it's about preserving their brand identity. They are betting that their cultural integrity is their greatest market asset.
Precisely. The Japanese publishing world is flipping the traditional global. Instead of chasing the lowest common denominator, they're establishing that the demand exists because of the content's difference.
Which is a very powerful economic statement.
A very powerful protectionist economic statement. It's keep your money if you demand creative changes because our growth depends on us not. And that takes some serious market confidence to pull off.
Okay, so if the money tells one part of the story, the actual content they're producing is the next chapter. Let's dig into the specific creative battlegrounds they're fighting to defend.
And this isn't just, vague industry chatter. We have very specific, very high-profile declarations from the people driving these massive corporate and creative engines.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting.
We need to contrast the corporate strategy with the sort of cultural assertion, the strategic declaration from Kadokawa that gives us the corporate mandate for this pivot.
And Kadokawa is a giant. They're one of the biggest and most influential manga publishers in the world. So if they make a policy shift, it sends shockwaves through the whole system.
Absolutely.
So let's start with their CEO, Tsuyoshi Natsuno. He basically laid out the formal business strategy, and he emphasized a very clear Japan-first approach to stories.
He did, but it's his explanation of how they should implement that approach so telling.
What was the core quote?
The core strategic quote argues that you create unique and successful work by not marketing with the mindset of, let's make a manga that will sell globally.
Okay, that is a direct rejection of the current global media playbook.
Completely. The standard model is you test concepts in multiple markets, you adjust them for universal appeal right from the start. Natsuno is saying, no, start intense.
So there's this innate confidence that the Japanese domestic market is a kind of universal quality filter.
That's the idea.
If it's high quality and it's a hit in Japan, it has enough inherent interest or character complexity or unique story beat that the rest of the world will naturally follow. You don't need to pre-engineer it.
And that's a huge shift in how you allocate resources. Instead of spending time and money trying to adjust your content for, say, overseas sensitivity, you're putting all those resources back into the fundamental process, domestic creative integrity.
Natsuno also stressed the need to create a wide variety of IP, but with a key condition.
The condition was without compromising on quality. And in this context, the sources make it crystal clear that compromising on quality is a direct reference to content restrictions being imposed by their international partners.
So quality is now intrinsically linked to creative freedom from outside mandate.
Yes. Kadokawa is drawing a very clear line in the sand. They're saying outside influence is a direct threat to the quality control of their product.
It's corporate code, basically.
It's corporate code for resisting the narrative or aesthetic demands that are imposed by international partners who are looking for a more globally palatable, which often just means politically sanitized product. They see those demands as lowering quality and therefore market.
Okay, so let's contrast that corporate mandate with the cultural assertion from one of the most influential creators in the medium, Hideaki Anno.
The mind behind Neon Genesis Evangelion.
His position was, well, it was a lot more blunt. He basically said that overseas fans should just adapt to Japanese work, not the other way around.
Anno's stance is just a pure assertion of cultural pride and creative integrity. It's the artist saying, we define the term exchange. We make what, if you want to engage with it, you come to us. You appreciate it on its own terms.
That feels radical in a world where media is constantly being diluted to maximize reach.
It's a confrontational stance, for sure, but it's entirely backed up by the market data we just talked about. They have the power now to demand that the global audience meet them on their home turf creatively.
But doesn't that kind of cultural rigidity, doesn't it risk alienating potential new audience, younger viewers who might need a better on-ramp to the culture? Is this strategy risk-free?
That is the critical tension in the whole strategy. And you're right, it's not risk. It's a calculated trade-off.
What are they trading?
They may lose the segment of the audience that demands their content be pre-filtered and adapted to their own cultural norm. But they are prioritizing the core established audience, the one that's driving that 20% growth, the audience that actively seeks out that unfiltered Japspec.
So for them, the risk of homogenizing the product and destroying its core appeal is much greater than the risk of excluding a few new viewers who can't adapt.
The IP engine is what they're protecting above all.
And we also have a really concrete cautionary tale from the director of the huge Sword Art Online franchise, Tomohiko Ito.
Right. And he has practical, firsthand experience trying to do this, trying to optimize for global appeal.
And what was his conclusion?
He stated it flat, being too conscious of a global appeal failure.
That's coming from someone who has been directly involved in a massive global IP. That's not theoretical.
Not at all. And this is maybe the most actionable intelligence in the source material. He elaborated that his key observation was that the Japanese perception of what they think will be well-received worldwide
Is totally different from what actually is popular overseas.
it differs fundamentally, yeah.
Why would there be such a disconnect? Why would they be misreading their own global consumer base so badly?
Ito implies that for a while, the Japanese industry was just listening to the wall. They were gatekeepers, critics to international collaborators.
The sources mention that these were often individuals who represented the same creative philosophies that were already causing issues in Hollywood.
Exact. They were listening to the loudest voices demanding change rather than just studying the consumption habits of the actual paying audience.
And the sources confirm this led to a concrete failure.
It did. Ito specifically noted that an attempt to make a season of Sword Art Online appeal more directly to what they perceived as Western taste, it just didn't.
So they listened, they modified the content, and the audience, both in Japan and internationally, said, no thank you.
That direct market failure gave them undeniable evidence for this Japan-first pivot. Compromise equals.
And Ito didn't mince words about why Japan is succeeding right now where others might be struggling. The source notes that he observed, Japan is the only country that still makes the kind of stuff that should be considered strange in North America.
And that strangeness is their competitive advantage. He's pointing out that creative output in Japan still has a level of uninhibited narrative and aesthetic freedom.
He gave a specific example.
He did. He cited things like girls fighting with lots of exposed skin. Now, this isn't just about fan service. It's about a creative environment that still permits genres and trope aesthetics that are increasingly restricted or censored or criticized out of its by, well, the strictness of political correctness in many West.
So it's the willingness to be stylistically and narratively transgressive, or at least culturally specific, without this constant fear of content.
That's the entire argument. The paying global audience is actively searching for content culturally raw, unique, and creatively
And Ito's conclusion is that by trying to appeal universally, they were erasing the very characteristics that made the content globally successful in the first place.
The strangeness and the uninhibited approach. That's what sells.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly for the core concept. If this Japan-first strategy is a defense mechanism, what exactly are they defending? What are these specific contents?
The sources detail a whole list, and these are specific examples of Western demands and restrictions that these creators see as creatively damaging, and which led directly to that audience rejection that he's talking.
They're defending against homogenization,
Yeah.
right? Through these mandated creative criteria.
Exact. The critique, which often centers on the strictures of political correctness, suggests that this outside influence imposes restrictions that fundamentally change character design, narrative tropes, the whole appeal of.
And the creators are looking at the data and seeing that audiences are actively rejecting the modified content.
And they're turning towards the traditional, unique Japanese stories precisely because it hasn't been diluted or sanitized.
So let's get into the specifics. What were some of these requested changes that the sources cited? The ones often linked to demands coming from Western critics or consultants.
A major point of contention centers on visual aesthetics and character design, particularly in things like fighting games or actions.
Okay.
The sources note these recurring demands for more body diversity, which, on the surface seems benign enough, but it often came packaged with specific restrictions.
And those restrictions included censoring classic anime tropes.
That's right. The source material highlights this push to censor what you could call kinetic energy. For example, making sure characters' boobs don't jiggle because it offends.
Now that sounds like a very specific, almost trivial point.
It does, but it represents a really deep intrusion into the core aesthetic and, even the physics of animation and game design that Japanese creators view as essential to their medium style.
It just illustrates the granular level of creative control that these outside influences were trying to exert, even down to the physics of their animated worlds.
It does. And another set of demands cited revolved around narrative structure and character identity.
Like the perceived pressure for mandatory LGBTQ+ representation.
Right. And the sources claim this pressure was sometimes expressed in this absolute way, paraphrased as a demand that everybody's got to be gay.
So we need to be clear here. The sources aren't saying the creators are against representation itself.
Not at all. It's against the mandate that overrides the integrity of the original story they're trying to tell.
And the sources are very clear on what the market response was to these changes.
Very clear. When studios changed their work to satisfy these perceived demands for homogenization, the fans, the paying customers, rejected it.
They asked the critical question, what the fresh hell is...
That market rejection is the core data point that Natsuno and Ito are acting on. They ran the experiment, They tried homogenization, and they got a direct negative feedback from their consumers.
They learned that when they altered their work to appease the perceived sensitivities of the West, they alienated the very audience, both at home and abroad, who were paying for the authentic original vision.
Which is why Ito specifically said that political correctness is strict in America, and that, in his view, it forces creators to hold back creative.
This gets to the idea of creative inhibition.
It's critical. When creators are working under a constant fear of offending or violating these strict political guidelines, they start to self-censor. They avoid controversial themes, they avoid complex moral gray areas, they avoid designs that might be deemed problematic.
And the Japanese studios saw that by homogenizing their series with Western sensitivities in mind, they inadvertently stripped the stories of the unique, compelling, and often boundary-pushing element that fans watched the medium for in the first place.
The fear of controversy starts to override the demand for good storytelling.
And that leads to derivative, safe, and ultimately less popular content.
Which is the exact opposite of what you need to sustain a 20% growth. They learned that safety in this market leads to financial failure.
Now, beyond the creation stage, there's another huge controversy. It's about changes that happen during the localization process itself.
The actual transition from Japanese into English.
Yeah. The sources cite this major recurring talking point among fans that localizations are taking increasing liberties with their source material.
This is a huge flashpoint because it involves the intermediary, the translators, the adapter, who are accused of inserting their own creative or ideological mandates after the original work is already.
They're accused of changing translations not because of linguistic necessity, but because they personally find it offensive.
That's the accusation.
Could you break down the difference between a necessary cultural adaptation and what the sources are calling a creative rewrite?
Sure. A necessary adaptation is finding the right idiom or cultural parallel to convey the original. So, changing a reference to a specific Japanese celebrity to a U.S. equivalent, so a joke will land.
That makes sense.
A creative rewrite, as the sources define it, is altering fundamental character identity or core plot. The sources cite accusations that localizers have been, for example, making a character trans or changing a character's sexual orientation when they were unambiguously not presented that way. Jeff.
And the reasoning given is to enforce a contemporary sense of representation, or because the localizer felt the original was lacking something.
Yes. And the fundamental disagreement here is profound. It rests on the integrity of the original text. The creators and the fans argue that the job is to translate the material, not rewrite it based on the translator's personal value.
The argument from the Japanese studios is pretty direct then. If you want to create a story with those mandates, you should be making new original IP.
Right, but trying to rewrite established, existing, beloved intellectual property is seen as a betrayal of trust, a betrayal between the creator, the intermediary, and the global audience. It's seen as artistic vandalism masked as progressive adaptation.
And this all just circles right back to the idea that the core commodity of anime has always been its weirdness. That uniqueness is what global fans are paying.
It's the great differentiator. I mean, if you look back historically, you can see this conflict playing out for decades. Japanese works always struggled to fit into the neat, sanitized boxes of U.S. television programs.
Why? Because they were inherently too weird or culturally ahead of the U.S. market.
Exactly, like the classic example of Ranma 12. The sources recall that the whole concept of a boy turning into a girl was just considered far too weird and complex for regular U.S. TV in the 80s, even though it was totally normal television.
And we also saw the comprehensive sanitization of Sailor Moon in its initial U.S. run.
Oh, yeah. The content had to be edited extensively. The most famous example, which the sources note, was changing same-sex couples very close cousins or just erasing.
So attempts to sanitize Japanese content have been happening for decades.
But the current wave of censorship, especially those imposed during localization, are perceived as being far more strict, creatively destructive to the narrative core.
And yet the current hits Chainsaw Man with its sheer bizarre absurdity, or Demon Slayer with its intense violence and complex morality, they're succeeding globally because they embrace that weird.
The sources emphasize that these properties are so damn weird that they would not have come out of the current year holiday.
Just think about the weight of that observation.
It means the global audience has this massive, unmet demand for stories that are complex and strange and often dark, morally ambiguous, and culturally specific.
Stories that haven't been filtered through a fear of controversy or a mandate for universal palatability.
And the content is simply viewed by the audience as just better. It's better because the storytelling is creatively uninhibited, the characters are compelling, and viewers feel more engaged because the creative risks were actually taken, not suppressed. And the Japan First movement is just them recognizing and defending
Okay, let's widen the lens a little bit. This Japan first shift, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's an active strategic response, not just to their own creative concerns, but to a perceived failure in their main competitor space.
Primarily Hollywood. That's a critical piece of context. Anime's explosive growth is often framed as this internal Japanese success story. But the sources point out some fascinating external factors that are helping to accelerate.
Right. The COVID-19 pandemic definitely boosted streaming for everyone.
But the growth of anime is also attributed significantly to the Writer Guild strike in 2023.
That connection is key because the WGA strike put a deep freeze on new scripted content coming out of Hollywood. It created this enormous market vacuum for high-quality, long-form entertainment.
And it accelerated an audience migration that was already happening. The general argument in the sources is that the creative influence and the box office dominance of Hollywood movies have been declining for a while.
The observation being that Hollywood keeps having these huge box office bombs because they keep picking the wrong things.
Meaning, they're pursuing established IP retreads or content that's driven by external mandates rather than genuine, compelling.
And audiences are just rejecting what they're being offered at home. If Hollywood keeps trying to push sequels or narratives that people don't want, then those audiences who now have all these digital platforms will naturally go look for something else.
The marketplace abhors a vacuum, and anime was perfectly positioned to fill.
This realization then creates a very clear strategic warning for the Japanese studio. It's what underpins the whole Japan First policy.
Absolutely. If they turn anime into a cartoon version of Hollywood movies, if they adopt the same creative restrictions and homogenization strategies, they will lose those big box office wins. The audience migration will just continue on to somewhere else.
Their entire current success is built on offering what Hollywood is explicitly not offering.
Which brings us to the dynamic competition for global. The core lesson of the market, according to the sources, is ruthlessly simple.
Audiences will move if their desire for good, solid entertainment is not being met.
And this is where the competitive landscape gets intensely global. If the well becomes poisoned in Japan by modifying their content for outside approval, the audience isn't going to wait around for the Western market to fix it.
They are highly motivated to find the next viable source of that culturally specific, high-quality, unrestricted storytelling.
And the sources are specific. They warn that audiences will move rapidly to Korean entertainment and Chinese.
And we are already seeing concrete evidence of that happening. Korean content, like the manhwa and then the anime adaptation to Solo Level, it's starting to track significantly with Japanese entertainment in terms of global audience and revenue.
And the sources point out the reason for that accelerating success of Korean content and increasingly Chinese content like donghua is the exact same reason Japanese content succeeded in the first.
And the same reason for the Japan First strategy today.
Exactly. They tell their own stories, they maintain cultural specificity, and as the sources frame it, they don't give two shits whether you like it or not. They focus on creative integrity and domestic appeal first, which, in a paradoxical twist of globalization, is what makes them globally appealing.
So the big realization across the board is that this market isn't about successful localization, which often means smoothing out the content.
No, it's about absolute authenticity, which means retaining all those cultural.
The final conclusion on audience motivation, then, it just summarizes why people are actively seeking out Japanese content.
It offers unique stories, interesting characters, and the viewer is more engaged in the story because, at the end of the day, the content is simply seen as better.
And that superiority is attributed to the purity of the storytelling, the willingness to embrace the strange and the common.
And the refusal to hold back creatively because of external political constraints or a fear of controversy.
It is just fascinating that the success of a truly global product one, on track to hit $63 billion, is rooted in consciously prioritizing the domestic and the specific.
It completely flips the standard model of global commerce. Instead of doing market research to ask, how do we change our product to fit this new market? They're asking, what made our original market love? And then they're just doubling down on that unique formula.
They're recognizing that their single biggest competitive advantage in a homogenized entertainment world is their unique cultural perspective.
And protecting that perspective is now their paramount business and creative strategy.
This has been a really comprehensive deep dive into the business, the creative politics, and the cultural economics of global pop culture.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And for you, the learner, the core takeaway here is clear. This shift to Japan First, it's not a creative tantrum. It's a calculated, market-driven strategy. It's rooted in the hard data of that staggering 20% growth rate and a renewed creative and conviction.
It is a sophisticated defense mechanism against content homage. The Japanese studios, they observe the creative and commercial failures of a content pipeline that's driven by external mandates.
And they saw the failure of their own attempts to cater to what they thought the West wanted.
Exact. And they realized that cultural specificity and creative freedom, these aren't burdens. They are the key drivers of their global success. They believe if they maintain their quality and their uniqueness, the rest of the world will continue to pay a massive premium to consume it.
Which ensures they own that massive growth projection.
The success story of Japanese content proves that in this information-saturated world where every media franchise is kind of trying to look and sound the same, authenticity, that willingness to be strange and uninhibited, is a highly valuable, high-demand, and extremely marketable component of your IP.
And it's something audiences are actively seeking out.
What's really fascinating here is the underlying implication in the sources. This entire strategic pivot, it rests on the premise that Western audiences are craving content that they just cannot get at home.
So if the primary appeal of a global product is its weirdness and its freedom from the creative constraints that dominate U.S. media,
if Western audiences are explicitly turning to other countries to see what they don't get at home, what does that imply about the current state of domestic storytelling in the U.S.? And what might it take to re-engage those audiences who are currently driving that $63 billion market toward a culturally unique foreign product?
that is a profound thought and something worth mulling over long after this deep dive is complete.